Hello, welcome. My name is Alden Reed, and you're watching Arcane Tablets. It's well past midnight, so let's talk about something fun or something tedious. It's gonna be kind of tedious, not gonna lie to you right now. I'm feeling irritated with freaking reality. I've been talking a lot about food lately and kind of all the complexities, not just of sort of what we should eat. And as I've talked about, I think that we should generally be obviously vegan. I think clearly just minimizing the suffering towards the animals is a basic first step, okay? Especially due to the just terrible and horrific conditions of modern factory farming. Absolutely. And even in general, really. I don't know. I had a friend when I was a lot younger who stopped eating meat. And the reason that he did so was that he was like, I don't think I could kill an animal. And it's pretty good logic. And of course, I think that we could, if we needed to, kill an animal. I'm actually pretty sure that if I really had to, that I could, but you get what he was saying. You get what I'm saying. He didn't want to kill an animal just to feed himself necessarily. Didn't really think it was a great idea, and that's of course why so much of that happens behind closed doors, away from us, right? Where the animals get slaughtered and butchered by professionals. Not even in nearly as a humane way as you might think. Honestly, traditional pastoralists and people raising animals were probably a lot more humane than people today. You can go find out sort of some of the ways that they kill and slaughter animals, especially when it gets to those massive, large-scale factory farms, and it's a lot worse than just very stealthily slitting a throat. The way the ancients did it was probably a lot more humane. In fact, I can almost guarantee you, in most cases, more humane than the way most animals, many of the billions and billions, it's like 80 billion, more than that, I think. I don't know, somewhere between 80 and 90 billion animals a year. And as I discussed in my video talking about the metaphysics of being vegan, that's some bad juju, folks. Okay? It is not good to just kill that many things. It really does create a cumulative stacking effect of negativity. Shedding blood really releases all this negative miasma, sort of the metaphysical reality that overlays or underlays everything that's going on, all right? Not good. All of that said, I've got a lot of issues with all of this, and I'm pretty fucking angry at God a lot of the time about this. I'm just gonna come out and say that, all right? And I love God very much. I am super into God. And I view God as kind of dual in nature. I view it as the great father and the great mother, right? Sort of these grandparents, these loving deities that are really at the heart of reality. The beings that really mold and fashion all these universes that we play in, right? Universes are temporary. Universes are created just like us. They come and they go. They have a life cycle, right? Reality is permanent, right? But I've got an issue with our grandparents. Okay? Big issue. I don't know. What is this place, okay? You know? I don't take a strictly Gnostic view of things. And I've talked a lot about the demiurge as well. And I believe in the demiurge. I think the demiurge is very real. I like to describe the demiurge as a spiritual AI, a sort of reflection of God that is in charge of kind of managing things in the universe, sort of cycling and recycling energy, very akin to the dark matter or the dark energy maybe that scientists talk about, sort of all the additional stuff, right? We are allegedly, I might add, all of this advanced science. I find it interesting, but I am, open to possibilities, and I'm not necessarily just sold on everything that physicists or astrophysicists or all these modern scientists necessarily say. But I think it's important and interesting to consider it. And according to their theories, that we, like the stuff that, the planets and the stars and everything else in the universe is more or less made of, the observable stuff, as they say, what they call atomic matter or sometimes luminous matter, sort of getting again at the idea of the universe being this spiritual hologram of light, you might say, right? Allegedly, that is only 5% of the universe. And there's actually a lot more stuff, right? This dark matter, and then even more primal than that, this dark energy, which to me is very akin to the primeval void. And I think that is very also similar to the stuff that the demiurge is kind of made of, right? Plato talks about this in his dialogues. He's the one who really introduced the idea of this demiurge when he's talking about, of course, the difference between the perfect, ideal, spiritual realm versus created physical reality, okay? And I don't necessarily completely subscribe to that dichotomy either, okay? I'm not sure there really is a actual spiritual realm where your body can sort of metaphysically exist. Now, I do think that there might be realms or dimensions where your body is mostly energetic, okay, and to a certain extent kind of metaphysical. But in terms of the highest high, I'm not necessarily sure that such a place exists. And of course, that's what the Gnostics believe as well. The Gnostics sort of carried on a lot of Plato's ideas, and they believe that this reality, all the stuff that this luminous matter or atomic matter is made out of, and maybe also then including the darkness, the dark matter and energy, right, as part of some imitation world, right? And Plato didn't necessarily conceive of that as being evil per se, or bad or degraded, just kind of sort of the way things have to be, right? Whereas the Gnostics absolutely take it a big step further and believe that our reality is a fallen, degraded, and perhaps even evil world, right? Managed by this being that is I really like the term spiritual AI. I think that's obviously kind of appropriate as far as everything going on, right? And I think sort of captures the idea of the demiurge as far as what Plato and the Gnostics are kind of talking about, right? But again, I don't necessarily subscribe to a strictly Gnostic view. I mean, I definitely veer towards that a lot of the time, and it's hard not to. When you look at the things that go on in reality, it can be pretty disappointing. I talked in my last video also about how even a lot of things that we kind of celebrate in reality are not necessarily as great as they seem to be, like nature, right? I don't hate nature at all. I generally like nature, but a lot of people sort of lionize and celebrate nature, hold nature up as this inherently beautiful and wonderful thing, and I'm not entirely so sure about that. I think there's a lot of that destructive, void, chaotic, demiurgic energy and impulses underlying nature and nature's behavior. I think we can agree generally nature is kind of sort of seeking balance and equilibrium between creation and destruction, but at the same time, nature is absolutely signing off on a lot of destruction. And if you look at a lot of the creatures and beings and things that exist, there's a lot of nasty stuff in reality, just out there to eat and consume other stuff. And that gets back to food, right? Which is really one of the more disturbing and concerning parts of reality. And obviously kind of one of the biggest things that can lead a lot of us to at least seriously entertain or consider the Gnostic viewpoint. Just this idea that we need to constantly be eating and consuming the energy and kind of the life force of other things. And yeah, animals clearly bad, right? And the good news is that we don't need to eat animals, so that's great. But a lot of people suggest, and there's a lot of spiritual information also pointing towards the idea that it might go beyond that. That it might also be about not really eating plants too, really just focusing on fruit, being a fruitarian or a frugivore, eating fruits and nuts and seeds, although there's plenty of disagreement about that too. Some people just think fruits and not even nuts and seeds, right? The more I dive into this, and of course, now that I'm checking more of this out, I'm just getting bombarded on Instagram and whatever, which is all these just niche fruitarian and frugivore ideas. And that's another thing I want to complain about. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, I think there's some there. And it does kind of get back to the whole Garden of Eden idea in Genesis, right? The way it's phrased, it does kind of seem like God is specifically talking about, or the authors of the Bible are specifically talking about just eating fruits, really. Not even necessarily vegetables, true vegetables, right? Because that's the thing with grains and vegetables, right? You sort of are, or I should say not sort of, you are ending their life cycle. They are plants, they're growing, they're living, and you're ending their life cycle. You are killing them in a certain sense, right? So that we can eat them and sustain ourselves, okay? Drinking this tea here, made of herbs. Technically, probably not fruitarian or frugivore. I'm working on that. I'll get to that in a second. So, yeah, I think there's some compelling ideas there. At the same time, God damn it, it is just... it's a lot just to be brave and give up animal products. It's a lot, okay? It's an easy thing to do. Everyone's doing it. People have done it for a long time, even though I do think there are some interesting, more magical periods earlier in our history, or perhaps we were indeed vegan or really even fruitarian or frugivore. So that's something to consider. But nevertheless, clearly, it's not an uncommon thing, and I certainly theorize or hypothesize that any world or planetary civilization or whatever goes through a period where they, probably do eat everything. And I think part of growing and becoming more spiritually evolved, is being like, okay, you know what? If I don't have to kill something and shed blood to sustain myself, if I can minimize that kind of suffering, right? Clearly, the suffering that animals deal with, right, is a lot worse than what plants are dealing with. It might be wrong in some very deep metaphysical level to kill plants too, but clearly it's not creating as much distress and suffering. Dominating and controlling and eating animals creates a lot of obvious emotional stress and suffering that is very relatable. All right, we as human beings can absolutely relate to that, just as we don't want to, well, most of us, I should say. Yeah. All right, trying to leave them alone. But anyways, most of us don't want to cause more harm and suffering to other people, and it's easy to transfer that onto animals. We don't really want to do that either. Okay? So that's fine. But yeah, it's still a lot. Animals taste good. Meat tastes really good. And I've got some questions about that. I do. I believe absolutely in God. I believe that God creates the universe. Creates all these universes, okay? Right? To a certain extent, I do believe in some ideas about evolution. Maybe not necessarily exactly in the same way that a lot of modern, conventional scientific people think about evolution, but I don't reject the idea entirely, the idea of progression. It goes along with the idea of the cycle of life and death and change and creation and destruction. Okay, maybe there's a certain kind of evolution that goes on, right? But, yeah, I don't know. If God wants us to not eat animals, ideally speaking, and to minimize suffering, and I'm pretty sure that is the case, why do animals taste good? Now, there's some interesting possibilities. It might have to do with parasites. I don't know that for sure, but I've theorized that for a long time. As we eat more meat and stuff, we get more parasites in us. And I think there's a decent chance, perhaps, that these parasites in certain ways might actually hijack sort of part of our system and get us to want more and more meat. So that's a possibility, okay? Now, there's also a possibility that there's other forces, metaphysical or spiritual forces, which are maybe trying to hijack us as well, and also trying to get us to eat more meat. Even if those things are true, even if both of those things are true, it still seems to be the case that meat does kind of taste good, and it does give you a certain kind of energy, right? It is different from the energy that you get from eating vegan food. And I'm not just talking about protein or something. I'm talking about something more primal. And I think that kind of has to do probably with sort of stealing the life force of the animals, right? I don't know, just getting some kind of something else. There's something kind of addictive about meat, right? It is almost a little bit like a narcotic. It does have a sort of narcotic effect. And the more meat you eat, the more you sort of crave. And again, that might be because of parasites or other metaphysical influences, but it might also just be a thing in and of itself, okay? And sure, my mind wanders and thinks, okay, maybe, right, we're going through these phases, we evolve, right? Maybe there's these cycles of ascension and descension, and God knows that we are going to at times be eating meat, right? And maybe sometimes that's really important. Maybe there's just nothing else to eat at times, and in order to continue being and existing, we do need to switch to eating animals, right? I guess in theory that would be how humans allegedly evolved from earlier primates and then eventually became hunter-gatherers, right? Presumably, for a while, still just being gatherers, right? Fruits, nuts, and seeds, getting back to the basics. And then at some point, as humans or any other being, right, intelligent being is evolving on their own world, they start to become more intelligent, and they can make weapons and do other things, and they can become hunters. And that might be very helpful. That might accelerate the growth of civilization, right? Because you can get a lot of calories and a lot of this energy from hunting animals. It also allows you to expand into more northerly climates. And that's another interesting thing, right, about being, to a certain extent, vegan, but especially about being fruitarian, right? Can't really be a fruitarian in a place that has true winter. So that's interesting. That's something to think about. And maybe that's the point. Maybe we start out in these tropical Edenic paradises and then eventually go through this period of dissension or falling where we start to learn all these other things. We start to make up civilization, as we call it. And then that does involve moving into northerly climates where you definitely need to eat at least vegetables, right? Probably, honestly, meat as well. The more northerly the climate is where you live, it's going to be harder to find sources of food unless you're hunting, right? It's not to say it's impossible. I mean, animals do it. There are herbivores and reindeers and woolly mammoths back in the day and stuff that were able to do, their thing, but we wouldn't be able to do that, okay? We can't survive on grass in the way they can and don't have the same tools and evolution, right? So that's an interesting question, too, that I wonder a lot about. If we're all supposed to be fruitarians or frugivores, then, I guess we can kind of keep living in these northern areas, right? Because as long as we still have enough tropical regions that are producing plenty of fruit and shipping it around, it kind of works, right? I'm living in North Carolina, which is not that far north, but I do need other places during the coldest points of the year to sustain me with fruits and vegetables to a certain extent. And yeah, you could have greenhouses too and stuff. There are some workarounds, although those do involve the technology that we've created, so not exactly the perfectly natural way of doing it. So that concerns me a little bit and raises questions about what the answer really is and what's really going on. But the fact that meat just tastes good, it bothers me a lot. And I think that, listen, it's great if you're just doing your fruitarian or frugivore thing. I tip my cap to you. You know, there's some people that seem to be able to get into that. And I don't want to say that it was easy for them. I'm sure that, you know, they had their own journeys. And obviously, we're usually only hearing about it often many, many years after they fully committed. And okay. At the same time, you know, there's some questions I have. I don't know. I'm just a very reflective, intellectual person. And it bothers me. And it does make me think there's some validity to what the Gnostics say, right? A lot of things, and I mean other things too, sort of pleasure seeking, sort of being hardwired for pleasure, right? And again, being hardwired for sex, for example, okay, that makes sense. You know, that can be explained reasonably without necessarily, you know, resorting to the idea of this evil demiurge being responsible for everything and really fashioning, you know, this fallen reality, right? Okay, yeah, we got to keep progressing, cycle of life and death, creation and destruction. Okay, don't want to live forever. That's not a good thing, right? There's a reason that we expire eventually, because we need to change it up. Variety is the spice of life. It is the spice of the universe. It's all just a story, and we're just incarnating over and over again. So it's good to change. So it is good in that way to have death. Death is a gift on some level. That is true. Even though it's almost impossible to really actively embrace that idea while you're living in your current vessel, right? But on a higher metaphysical sense, there's a certain truth to that. Okay? Absolutely. But yeah, it still bothers me how much some of these things are so appealing, right? Just how much we want to have sex, to relate it to the food thing, right? And I mean, I feel like I've got my shit pretty under control as far as that goes. Like, I don't hit on anyone, okay? In fact, it's a bit of a problem for me, okay? I have difficulty actually getting into relationships with women because I'm very standoffish. I kind of find the whole process of just trying to get into any kind of sexual relationship with someone kind of just gross at times. Not that I don't think love making can be beautiful. I do think it can be beautiful. Absolutely. And I really do want to have a partner. Very much. And to make love with them. Right? But it is just kind of gross a lot of the time. And again, I am like really, really on the low end of the horn dog meter as far as men go. So if being very not sexual, but still constantly thinking about sex and just looking at women all the time, not leering or in a gross way, but just, listen, I'm going to tell you, and I don't know how it is for you ladies, but we just go around and I can't help but kind of think about sex every time we look at even a halfly young, attractive woman. Even whatever, just almost any woman sometimes, okay? There's something just kind of deep in us, and I'm really healthy and do a lot of positive spiritual stuff and just have never been one for, again, really hitting on women, and I really haven't had all that much sex in my life either. I'll just tell you that too. Okay. I've had some partners, but not nearly as much as probably a lot of people have had, or a lot of men have had, right? So I can only imagine what is going on in the minds of most other men who are a lot more actively pursuing this stuff, okay? It bothers me a lot. It's really fucking annoying, in fact, how much this drive to have sex and procreate just rules my body and at times my mind. Just in the sense that the desire for delicious food and meats and stuff rules my body and my mind at times even. There's a funny tension there between the mind and the body. And ultimately, we are souls. We are spirits, okay? And we do want our soul to be in charge, right? The mind is kind of the mediator between those two things, but it's a crowded room, right? And everybody's kind of got an agenda. The body is just like sex, 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 eat, 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 right? Pleasure. And then the mind is kind of like, you know, into some of that stuff. And the mind recognizes the utility and at times necessity of these things, right? And it can be a little bit easily overwhelmed by the body too. But the mind is at least more aware of other things and kind of trying to do its own thing. The mind wants to be in charge itself. So it's funny because the mind is kind of trying to listen to the soul or the spirit, especially because that gives it more ammunition to tell the body to shut the fuck up, right? But at the same time, then the mind is still wary of the soul and the spirit and intuition and even emotion to a certain extent, because the mind is a rational computer brain that doesn't entirely understand that either, okay? And the confusion of the mind is also kind of the basis of this whole video, right? And the irritation that I'm expressing, it's really my mind more than anything. My spirit, my soul, has a pretty good sense of these things, right? It's not good to really eat animals or create suffering. Probably even to minimize things further, to not even eat that much non-fruit vegan food too, okay? And also, like, casual sex, spirit and soul, no, definitely not. Just going around and having sex with people just because it feels good or because they're attractive or you want to procreate. No, those are not good reasons to have sex or to make love, which is really the term that is best when we're talking about the really good spiritual activity that we're trying to get at, okay? My soul knows that. And my mind is just irritated, right? Because then my mind is like, well, if that's the case, soul, why is body just overwhelmingly into that stuff? And what does that say about this reality, huh? What does all that hardwiring, all that hedonism, that pressure towards pleasure say about this reality? And again, you can fall back on the idea of balance and all that stuff, as I said, cycle of creation and destruction and life and death and blah, 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 blah. And I know I'm blah, blah, blahing it, but no, it's true. It definitely does make sense. At the same time, it still bothers me because it's kind of intense. Maybe that's kind of getting it. It's not just that it happens, but the intensity of it. And I theorize that we go through these cycles of ascension and descension, right? Kind of similar to the traditional ideas of going from the Satya Yuga to the Kali Yuga and then back again. Or in Hesiod, right? The Golden Age down to the Iron Age and back again. That's what I think is going on, okay? And I think during these periods, basically, the demiurge is kind of waking up and going to sleep. And this is kind of what a lot of our fantasy storytellers, our oracle storytellers, talk about in all their fiction and stuff, right? The idea of this Lord of Darkness, right? The devil, as it were, who at times is sort of locked in this prison or asleep, right? The great eye closed. But then there goes through these periods, we go through these periods, right, where this being wakes up and becomes more conscious. And during those periods, things get probably a lot worse, right? And so the reason that things are so buck wild now, especially among, you know, powers that be doing their stuff, right, is because we are really cresting towards the end of this Kali Yuga or this Iron Age, right? And so, yeah, stuff is super hedonistic, and maybe that's why the pressure feels so great. Maybe when the demiurge is asleep and we're ascending again, right, we're not so hedonistic. Maybe men are a lot less horn doggish during those periods, and it's a lot easier to at least be vegan and not eat animals and all that stuff. I think that's probably true. I think that's probably what's going on. And one of the reasons I think that or hope that is because the alternative is just awful to think about. And this is kind of something that I think the Gnostics kind of miss, which is that you can theorize that we're in some kind of fallen reality, some pale imitation world created by the demiurge, by Yaldabaoth, by Samael, the blind god, right? But that doesn't take God off the hook, okay? The buck stops with God, now and always. God is still in charge of everything. So, if the demiurge is allowed to create some kind of evil soul trap spiritual simulation, then God is allowing that to happen. So, it doesn't excuse God. It's not like the demiurge and Pista Sophia or whatever are just going off and it's like off God's radar or something. God's not like the great father and the great mother, right? They're not like, oh, where did they go? What are they doing? No, definitely not, okay? So that's why I ultimately cautiously reject those ideas. Although I gotta say, it's challenging at times. It really is, okay? Because God is still responsible. Always. All right? Now, at the same time, though, I guess you could say that maybe that's just something that God does. I don't know. Just lets some kind of fallen simulation being created and then drops down a bunch of super divine souls and stuff to bring it to an end or something. I guess you could say that, but that doesn't really make sense to me either. Partly because I don't really think there's any true end game to reality, right? Universes might come and go, but really it's just a series of stories, a never-ending series of stories, okay? And even if this was some fallen simulation, at some point it's going to come to an end then. And then what happens then? I guess maybe another fallen simulation happens, and maybe again, if you stop thinking about it as a fallen simulation, but just think about it as a normal spiritual situation where simulation and situation, right? Spiritual hologram, where there is going to be some good and bad, right? And there's going to be these cycles of descension and ascension, right? And again, there just has to be that. There has to be that to have contrast, right? Goodness and love and everything that we want, that we're moving towards, right? Well, that most of us want and are moving towards, again, other than certain groups. Yeah, we see you. Not that you're trying to hide that much anymore. But yeah, we want all this stuff, and there's got to be definition, right? Just like there has to be in a good story. You're not going to pick up and read a story or watch a TV show or watch a movie where there's no villains or there's no drama or there's no bad things that happen. Absolutely, those things have to happen. And again, getting back to the whole idea of this cycle of creation and destruction, clearing out space so that more stuff can happen, right? So that new plot lines and characters and things can come about. Okay, that all makes perfect sense. Absolutely. I think that is the most likely explanation, right? And it is a very balanced and logical explanation that does account for a lot of things. So maybe that's the answer. But it's still very challenging and frustrating at the same time. Yeah. I am just only recently coming to terms with being vegan and really accepting that. And it's very challenging and irritating then to just be bombarded with a lot of stuff being like, well, we got to keep going, right? Got to keep going past that. Got to go raw and then got to go frugivore, right? Kind of the order of it, right? Go vegan, go raw vegan, go frugivore. And I don't know. Yeah, I mean, maybe whatever. There's some other levels or steps. And again, there's plenty of disagreement. And that just also just nauseates me as well. That's another thing I want to complain about. Just like the amount of different ideas about what's happening in reality. And yeah, here I am making a video on YouTube talking doggy. for my own ideas, but I like making these riff videos. I've got some other stuff that I like to talk about too, which is a little bit more structured. You can check out some of my structured content as well, but I really enjoy making these videos, especially because I don't really have a super specific agenda. I mean, I generally have a vague sense of what I might want to say, but I just get out here and I talk and just kind of complain a lot too. Okay? And I like that. It makes me kind of human. Yeah, I've got wonderful ideas and lots of things I'd like you to think about and contemplate. And like I said, I'm pretty sure about certain things, and I've stated at various points during this video when I'm more or less sure about something or think it's probably the case. But I'm also just kind of moving away from just, oh, this is exactly what's happening. I've got all the answers for ye. I don't know. I mean, also just kind of moving away from the idea of trying to be heroic, right? Whatever that looks like. Yeah, I want to create a better reality and ascend to a higher timeline and bring heaven to earth. Absolutely. And those are not trivial things. I don't mean to make light of them. The rather atrocious dystopian ideas and vision that the powers that be have are... No, definitely not. Like, people who are trying to move away from that and envision and create something better, absolutely. That's what we're looking for. But it is also just at the same time exhausting to wade through all of these things, wade through all of these ideas. And now, of course, with the internet and modern social media, well, every fool like me can get out here and just doggy, right? But that's the thing. That's kind of what I'm saying. Yes, we are trying to be kind of heroic in the sense of getting to this better reality, this better state of being, this better way of living that minimizes suffering. Even though we understand there's going to be suffering, bad things are going to continue to happen. It's part of the cycle, creates definition, allows for progression. Well and good, okay? And that's, another kind of annoying paradox about reality, right? We do have free will, and we are allowed to do whatever we want. That's true. And I think that we do build up karma for doing bad things, and to a certain extent, we're going to have to kind of work that off. But I don't believe in hell, and I don't believe that we're going to be directly punished for doing bad things. So, yeah, there's a lot of freedom in that sense, okay? And again, if it's just a story, kind of an arbitrary story, if we just exist to exist, well, yeah, the do what thou wilt crowd, they're not entirely off base in some of their thinking, okay? To a certain extent, it doesn't really matter. You can take a kind of a nihilistic approach towards it, which really just devolves into hedonism, actually, but ultimately, I do believe that reality, that life is full of meaning, but we make the meaning. And ultimately, I do believe that good and bad are not just relative terms. I do think that our souls know what is good and what is bad. So I disagree with the moral relativist crowd, which just says that doesn't matter at all. It definitely does. But it's a paradox, right? God gives you free will and lets you do whatever you want, but also tells you that it would be better to be good. And you feel deep down inside your soul, your spirit, which is really, truly a divine shard of infinity, right? And a little bit of God experiencing the universe and creation through you as well, right? Which doesn't mean that you are God. You are not God. I am not God, okay? Yes, we're all within God. There's a certain technical truth to that idea of oneness. But ultimately, it's because we have differences, duality, and polarity, and distinctions and categories that we have meaningful existence. There could not be meaningful existence without those things. And we are ourselves, and there are these meta-consciousnesses, again, which I call the Great Father and the Great Mother, God, right? or God and the goddess. I don't want to just constantly say those names over and over again. And I like just using God. You know what I mean by God, right? But God is an intelligent, conscious entity. Not with a body. Not that's going to incarnate. But still real. And constantly observing you. God is always with you. Every second, every moment. And God speaks through the universe. God talks through the fabric of reality, signs and symbols and synchronicities. Is God, the great Father and the great Mother, speaking to you, speaking to us, right? And so if you're up to bad things and evil things, I promise you, God is there the whole time watching you. Don't think that you're not being watched. Oh yeah, you like to talk about how you watch everyone else, huh? Well, guess what? Joke's on you, because you're getting watched all the time, every second. And God is sitting there saying, I seen that. Oh, I saw that too, right? Okay. And you might not be sent to hell or punished or tortured per se, but there is some accounting that goes on. I'm pretty sure about that. And people talk about the idea of a life review, right? And I think that's probably true. That's a very common theme that comes up with all near-death experiences. And a lot of spiritual traditions talk about this idea of after death, that you go through this review of everything that you did in your previous life, which involves you experiencing very directly the suffering that you created. So, y'all who think you're so great and no one's watching you and that you ain't gonna be held to account, I wouldn't be so sure about that. And thankfully, God is a lot more merciful than the idea of God in the Old Testament, which is probably really the demiurge, by the way, in case you can't figure that out. Yeah, all that slitting of animal throats and splattering blood all over the place. Does that sound like the real God to you? I don't think so. Might want to think a little bit more carefully about some of that, right? Now, I'm down with Jesus, Yeshua, for sure. But I think a lot of his teachings and the ideas surrounding him are unfortunately rolled up into a lot of stuff that is highly questionable, to put it mildly. And might be stuff that it's time to move away from and reconsider. But anyways, yeah, so like I said, we're here and it's frustrating. Even though I'm advocating do-gooderism, I find it frustrating. And I really like eating fruit, fortunately. Some people don't like fruit. I can't even imagine what they would think about these ideas. But I like eating other vegan food too, so I'm struggling through it. Right now I'm kind of, I don't know, a half-assed raw vegan, I guess maybe you'd say. I don't know, I'm at times a half-assed fruitarian. I'm doing a pretty good job lately, actually, of not eating any cooked food, but I can't say for sure I've entirely left it behind, right? There's always backstepping that can potentially happen, okay? Sometimes it can take a long time to get past that. But like I said, it's just frustrating enough to give up animal products because they taste good. And I really enjoy eating all this different food. It's a big pleasure of life. And even if pleasure is questionable and very much related to the demiurge, again, even if we're not in a fallen world, strictly speaking, it's definitely something that we're trying to moderate at the very least. But at the same time, I do think that God wants us to have pleasure. I think God wants us to enjoy the food that we eat, even if it's just fruit. And God wants us to enjoy making love to someone that we are in love with and truly connected with. Absolutely. I don't believe in celibacy, right? And I don't believe in breatharianism, breatharianism. Okay. I believe in eating food. Definitely. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll find out. Whatever. Okay. But yeah, I don't think that God is taking a strictly anti pleasure stance. And that's another issue I take with the Gnostics. And just that very monkish like spiritual aesthetic tradition that is also found in other spiritual ideas, especially in a lot of South Asian, to a certain extent, East Asian traditions as well. Now, I'm not about that, okay? No, again, I think it's a never ending series of stories. I think we exist to exist, and I think a big part of existence is absolutely enjoying yourself. And part of that is engaging in physical pleasure. Like I said, right? So that's all good, but yeah, it's frustrating. It can be very limiting, definitely. And it can be hard to move faster than you're ready to move. And I don't know where I'm at. I mean, hell, I might be just actually almost fruitarian or frugivore already. I might be a couple years away from really fully being that. I don't know. I guess I'm just going with it and just seeing how it goes. But yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, I would like to enjoy some cooked food at times. I like some delicious cooked vegan Indian food or Mexican food or Thai food, all that stuff. A lot of those cuisines are really good. They make good vegan food, right? Not surprising that some of the more northern cuisines, right, tend to be a little bit more animal product based. Getting back to that whole thing, right, about how kind of hard to be a frugivore, right, if you're living in more northerly climates, right? But anyways, as I continue to drink this tea, this valerian tea, which really helps me sleep, I take a little valerian tincture, right? I gave up THC, trying not to use any drugs at all, including cane sugar as well, and chocolate. I actually, full disclosure, I had a coffee today, right? I don't know, I was just feeling kind of angry and salty about it. Whoa! Let me tell you, when you stop using all these substances and give up caffeine for a period of time and have yourself a coffee, oh my God, is that a drug? Ooh wee ooh! I mean, that was like 10 hours ago, maybe even more, I don't know, 12 hours ago, and I'm still feeling, still feeling it, all right? So, yeah, you know, everyone who's going around just eating cane sugar and chocolate and drinking caffeine, even green tea, okay, even matcha, you are going around high all the time, just so you know. And that's not necessarily fundamentally bad, but I think it can be problematic at times. Partly maybe to do with these cycles of ascension and descension, right? I theorize that when the demiurge is ascendant and when we're descending, right? And things are getting worse and more hedonistic, and perhaps other spiritual forces and influences, the archons, right, allied with the demiurge, beings that are often referred to as demons as well, right? I think that they are able to influence you more easily when you're high, including cane sugar and caffeine as well, not just alcohol and cannabis and other stuff. And I think there are some times maybe for those things. I do believe in the medical properties of cannabis, right? And I understand why people want to use drugs as well. I understand why you might want to drink a little alcohol, at least maybe just have a beer or a wine. God, it is incredibly stressful. I'm so frustrated with how stressful reality is. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay? And I'm trying my best to be very healthy and focusing on the good things and all of that, but I think that can be a little bit dangerous too. And I think some of that gets to a kind of a toxic kind of positive spiritual mindset, which might seem appealing, but is actually perhaps also the work of certain negative forces that just kind of want you to lay down and ignore some of the other stuff that is going on and get you to think that somehow you are bringing on negative things in reality just by thinking about them or focusing on them. I don't think that's the case. I don't want to get too deep into that, but I'm not too keen on those ideas, and I think if you start to think about the logic behind them, you'll start to see that there's maybe a bit of a trap there. And some of those ideas are not necessarily as good or accurate or helpful to you navigating reality as you might think. Anyways, that's a whole nother topic for another video. Right. But yeah, I mean, God, can't a man just enjoy some cooked vegetable stew? Is that so bad? And I think in one sense, the answer is no. Probably God is saying, oh, it's not so bad, Alden. It's not the maximum good, right? But it's not so bad. It's certainly a whole many levels beyond just whatever, eating animals or certain other more negative hedonistic behavior, right? But there's still this pressure, right? And that's also annoying because, I'm very fond of telling people that they are wonderful and beautiful and absolutely perfect the way they are. I like to end a lot of my videos saying that. But that's also irritates me because it sort of goes against the grain of spiritual evolution and growth. Well, I guess if there's room for growth, maybe we aren't so perfect. And in a way, I think both things are kind of true at the same time, but yeah, it irritates me. It does. All right? And maybe I am just wailing and railing against these fundamental ways in which reality has to be. Okay, as I've described. Cycle of creation, destruction. Definition, contrast, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's probably the case. So maybe God is perfectly sympathetic and it's like, yeah, Alden. It's just kind of the thing. It's the price of existence. There couldn't be existence without that. But I guess I'm just sharing how I feel. Besides just expounding on these things and advancing certain ideas or theories that I have, I'm just also trying to be a human being. Trying to be an imperfect human being. And tell you if you're struggling with these things too and you're still annoyed by a lot of them, kind of irritated by how people can just so easily step into some of this stuff sometimes. And again, it wasn't necessarily so easy for them. We're just often seeing the final product, right? They went through a lot of these things as well. But yeah, if you're philosophically minded like I am, these are questions that don't really have answers or have answers that are rather paradoxical and unsatisfactory. And so, yeah, minimizing suffering for sure. But I don't know. I wonder. I wonder what I'm going to do in the future. I feel very confident about not eating animals anymore. And really eating a diet which is, at the very least, pretty raw focused and heavily oriented towards fruits. And I'm pretty solid about moving away from alcohol and cannabis and even caffeine and chocolate. Although it's challenging for sure. Really so bad to have a piece of chocolate every now and then? I don't know. It doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world. I've been kind of wanting to make this Indian stew, this coconut curry that I like to make. And I've been hesitant to make it, of course, because I just feel so much goddamn pressure. Just like, oh, I'm just letting God down. I'm letting the collective down or something by not just maximizing the goodness. So I don't know. Again, is my life to live? That's the annoying thing. Being a do-gooder does mean sacrificing a lot of latitude. Kind of sacrificing a lot of free will. Yeah, you have free will, but God's also over there in the corner, right? Being like, I know I gave you free will, but I kind of do want you to do all these things. So, God, I'm just saying. A little bit of a bait and switch there. Kind of pisses me off. And again, I get it. And I guess if I was in your position, I would probably look at it the same way, but yeah. And it irritates me even further because I have to admit that the do what that wilt crowd does have a point. And that, yeah, ultimately there are no true stakes, okay? You're not going to go to hell. You're not going to be eternally punished, even if you do a lot of evil. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to have to deal with some stuff. You will. And I'll be very direct about this. I promise you, okay, you will. You will be held to account in certain ways for doing bad and evil things. But, you know, if you're vegan and doing all sorts of other positive good things and following the golden rule in other ways and trying to help people and make a better world, maybe if you even just eat a little chocolate or have a glass of wine now and then or whatever, you do some of that stuff, no, I don't think you're going to be like getting slammed in your life review, okay? That's definitely, if it's not what God's looking for, in the much, much more acceptable camp of things to do, okay? For sure. For sure. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, I guess that's about it for now. I don't know. I don't truly have the answers, okay? But I guess I'll end on this, getting back to talking about being a hero versus being the fool, okay? Love that fool card in the tarot deck. And in a certain way, I do think the fool card kind of at times symbolizes the demiurge, but that's a little complicated. Not entirely. Obviously, there's the devil card too, so it's a little bit of both. But to the extent that the fool does symbolize certain positive things, you know, it gets to this whole kind of issue of just living your life, right? And listening to your soul and trying to do the best you can and minimize suffering, but also just, you know, doing whatever. I don't know. Not worrying so much. That's another paradox of it, right? We want to be good and do good, but then that leads to so much worry and stress, which really does reduce the quality of our life, which again is kind of arbitrary and just something that we just do to do it. We exist to exist. We're just actors incarnating, playing these roles and these stories. And if the point is just kind of to enjoy that, then constantly stressing about being good really hurts that. It really damages that. So that irritates me as well. So I don't know. I think just trying to be a do-gooder and minimize suffering, but also just kind of being a fool and just dancing through life and rowing your boat merrily down the stream. I think that's probably okay. And you know what? There's always going to be another life and a new story, so you can do something a little bit different next time. And yeah, you know, you're not going to experience it in the same way, all right? That's why you do sort of forget each lifetime, but still, you're still going to be a consciousness experiencing things. Your soul is going to continue. I promise that. I promise you that. That I will absolutely guarantee. Okay, for sure. So yeah, I'm stepping into that, being a little bit more of a fool, a do-gooding fool. Sort of the most recent tarot reading I got, the only tarot reading I've ever got. The future cards I got were the Death card, Knight of Cups, and the Fool. And so here I am, more and more stepping into that. I want you to know I love you so much and that God loves you so much. I want you to know you are wonderful and beautiful and absolutely perfect just the way you are. Many blessings. We'll see you again soon for another Midnight Riff.